Right now, on this planet, there is exactly one kind of human you, me, everyone you have ever met. One species, spread across every continent, speaking thousands of languages, living in deserts and cities and mountains, but biologically, all the same thing. That has never been normal. For most of the time humans have existed, there were multiple human species living at the same time, sometimes even in the same valley. So, what happened to all of them? The short answer is we don't fully know. The long answer involves ice ages, interbreeding, a tiny island full of hobbits, and possibly us. Let's start with the part that surprises people the most. 200,000 years ago, if you were standing in Europe, you would not have run into a modern human. You would have run into a Neanderthal. Thick-browed, barrel-chested, incredibly strong, and, we now know, not the dumb brutes they were made out to be for a century. At the same time, in Asia, there was another group called the Denisovans, known mostly from a single finger bone and a few teeth found in a Siberian cave. And on a small island in Indonesia called Flores, there was a species barely over 3 feet tall, nicknamed the Hobbits, officially Homo floresiensis. So picture that for a second. At one point in history, our planet had at least 4 or 5 different human species, all walking around at the same time. That's not science fiction. That's just what the fossil record shows. Here's the part that's hard for modern people to understand. We tend to think of evolution as a straight line ape, caveman, modern human, like a poster in a science classroom. That poster is wrong. It was never a line. It was a tree, with branches going out in different directions, and most of those branches just stopped. So the real question isn't how did we evolve? It's why are we the only branch still standing? And that's where this gets genuinely interesting. Let's go stage by stage, because this didn't happen all at once. It happened in waves, over hundreds of thousands of years. Stage 1, Africa, roughly 300,000 years ago. This is where Homo sapiens us first shows up. Not fully modern yet, but recognizably us. The evidence comes from a site in Morocco called Jebel Irhoud, where researcher Jean-Jacques Hublin and his team found skulls that pushed our species' origin back further than anyone expected. At this point, we are just one more human species among several, nothing special yet, just surviving in East and North Africa. Meanwhile, other species had already been established elsewhere for a very long time. Neanderthals had been living across Europe and the Middle East for over 300,000 years. They weren't new. If anything, they were the established locals, and we were the newcomers. Stage 2. Humans start to leave Africa. This happens in pulses, not one single migration. Some groups leave early and don't survive long term. Other waves, starting around 70,000 years ago, spread out and eventually populate the entire globe. And here's where something remarkable happens. We start running into the other human species that are already living in those regions. This is the part that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. We didn't just meet Neanderthals. We had children with them. In 2010, a team led by geneticist Svante Pääbo sequenced the Neanderthal genome and found something nobody expected. Most people alive today, if your ancestry traces outside of Africa, carry somewhere between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA. Not metaphorically, literally. It's in your genome right now, affecting things like your immune system and even how your skin reacts to sunlight. So think about what that actually means. 2 different human species, similar enough to have children together but different enough to be classified separately, coexisted, interacted, and interbred. That's not a footnote. That completely changes how we should picture that period of history. It wasn't modern humans marching in and wiping out the competition like a movie. It was messier, more complicated, and in some ways, more intimate than that. Same story with the Denisovans. Certain populations in Papua New Guinea and parts of Asia carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. A gene inherited from Denisovans even helps some modern populations, like Tibetans, survive at high altitude with low oxygen. So in a very real sense, other human species didn't just disappear. Parts of them are still walking around today, inside us. But here's where it gets interesting, and also kind of sad. Even though we interbred with them, Neanderthals still went extinct as a distinct population, roughly 40,000 years ago. Same with the Denisovans, though we're less sure of the exact timeline since we have so little skeletal evidence for them. And the small Hobbit species on Flores Island disappeared around 50,000 years ago, possibly not long after modern humans arrived on that same island. So, if we had children with them, why did they still go extinct as separate species? There are 3 main theories, and this is where researchers actually disagree with each other, which honestly makes it more interesting. The first theory is competition, not violent conquest necessarily, but slow, quiet resource competition. Anthropologist Chris Stringer has argued that Homo sapiens may have simply been slightly more efficient, better long distance trade networks, more flexible social groups, wider variety in tools and diet. Over thousands of years, small advantages compound. If one group is even 5% better at surviving lean winters, that's enough, over dozens of generations, to slowly outcompete a neighboring population without a single act of violence. Think of it like two coffee shops on the same street. Neither one gets robbed or burned down. One just slowly gets more customers, year after year, until the other one quietly closes. The second theory is climate. The period when Neanderthals disappeared overlaps with extreme climate instability, rapid temperature swings, shifting ecosystems, unpredictable prey migration. Neanderthals were incredibly well adapted to cold, stable, ice age environments. But when that stability broke down, adaptability mattered more than raw physical toughness. And this is where modern humans may have had an edge, not because we were stronger, but because our social groups were often larger and more interconnected, which meant information, tools, and survival techniques could spread faster across a wider network. The third theory, and this one's important, is assimilation. This is the idea that Neanderthals and Denisovans didn't necessarily get wiped out in the traditional sense. They got absorbed. Small population, lots of interbreeding, over enough generations. The distinct genetic and physical markers of Neanderthal simply blend into the much larger modern human population until there's no separate group left to identify. Not a disappearance, a merger. Most researchers today think it wasn't just one of these theories. It was probably all three, layered on top of each other, in different regions, at different times. Climate stress in one area, competition in another, interbreeding blending populations somewhere else. Extinction wasn't one event. It was a slow, uneven process that played out differently depending on where you were standing. So how did the Hobbits on Flores Island fit into this? Their story is a little different, and honestly, a little eerie. Because they were isolated on a small island, they show something called island dwarfism, where large mammals shrink over generations due to limited resources. They survived, completely cut off, for possibly over 700,000 years, using simple stone tools, hunting small elephants called stegodons that had also shrunk to fit the island. Then, sometime after modern humans arrived in that region, they vanish from the fossil record. We don't have solid genetic evidence of interbreeding with them like we do with Neanderthals, which makes their disappearance feel less like a merger and more like a straightforward extinction. Here's the part that reframes everything you've heard so far. For most of human history, being the only human species wasn't the default. It was actually unusual. Multiple human species coexisting was closer to normal. What we're living in right now, a single, solitary human species with no direct competition, might actually be one of the more unusual periods in the entire history of our genus. That flips the question on its head a little. It's not just why did the others go extinct? It's why did this specific branch, us, end up being the one left standing, out of 5 or 6 competing branches, across 3 different continents, over hundreds of thousands of years. And if you zoom out even further, there's an uncomfortable pattern here. Every time Homo sapiens has expanded into a new region occupied by another human species, that other species has, within tens of thousands of years, disappeared. Every single time, Australia, Europe, Asia, small isolated islands. It's not proof of direct violence, but it is a pattern that's hard to ignore. So was it us? Did we cause it? The honest answer is probably, but indirectly, and not necessarily through war. It's less we hunted them down and more we were really good at surviving, and that success came at a cost to everyone else competing for the same limited resources. Sometimes that cost was interbreeding and absorption. Sometimes it was slow economic squeeze, like the coffee shop example. Sometimes, especially in places with less genetic evidence of mixing, it may have been more direct and more brutal. Here's a comparison that might make this land differently. Imagine every ecosystem on Earth having a top predator, and then a new predator shows up that's slightly smarter, slightly more social, and slightly better at cooperating in large groups. You don't need that new predator to be more violent to reshape the entire food chain. You just need it to be more efficient at surviving. That's arguably what modern humans were, relative to other human species. Not necessarily stronger, not necessarily crueler, just on average, more efficient. So when did this actually settle into the world we know today? One single human species, no competitors. By around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals as a distinct population are gone. The Denisovans fade from the genetic record not long after, though the exact timing is still debated because we have so few physical remains of them. Homo floresiensis vanishes from Flores Island sometime after 50,000 years ago. From that point forward, as far as we can tell, Homo sapiens has had the entire planet to itself. No competing human species. No other branch of the tree to bump into. For roughly the last 40,000 years, out of a genus that stretches back over 2 million years, we've been alone. That's actually a small fraction of our overall history as a genus, even though it feels like the only reality we've ever known. And this is the twist that changes how you should think about the whole story. We often talk about human evolution like it was a march toward inevitability, like modern humans were always destined to be the last ones standing. But the genetic evidence tells a very different story. It tells a story of overlap, mixing, competition, and coincidence. If a handful of environmental variables had gone differently, if climate instability had hit modern human populations instead of Neanderthal ones, if isolation had worked in the other direction, you could be watching this video as a Neanderthal, wondering what happened to the group known as Homo sapiens. That's not a comforting thought, but it is probably the most accurate one. Our position as the only human species isn't a triumphant ending to a story. It's closer to a survivor's account of a much messier, much more crowded past, where several human species were all trying to make it, and only one of them did. So why are we the only human species left? Because for tens of thousands of years, several human species overlapped, competed, interbred, and adapted to a rapidly changing world, and Homo sapiens simply came out the other side of that process while the others didn't. Not because we were destined to, because, in the end, we were the ones who happened to survive it. And maybe that's the real, uncomfortable ending to this story. We didn't inherit the Earth because we were meant to. We inherited it because we're the last ones standing in a competition none of us ever agreed to enter.